Coming up on the Threat Status Podcast, we talk to Rob Ryan, Director of Business Development at Teledyne FLIR, about the future of U.S. drone capabilities, how AI should be integrated into the military, whether U.S. military personnel trust machines and robotics, and much more. And then we break down the latest on U.S. Iran nuclear negotiations, Ukraine-Russia peace talks, and Guy and I take you inside this week's Threat Status Golden Dome for America event in Pentagon City. Don't forget to go to WashingtonTimes.com and sign up for the daily Threat Status newsletter. Hello and welcome to the Threat Status Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wolfgang, national security correspondent at the Washington Times, and I'm joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host, Guy Taylor, the national security editor here at the Times. It's been a busy week for us. Guy and I each moderated panel discussions at the Threat Status Golden Dome for America event earlier this week, where there was actually some breaking news about the future of the Golden Dome. We'll talk about that later, and Guy and I will take you behind the scenes of that Threat Status event and give our thoughts on some of the many issues and subplots swirling around the Golden Dome. But before we get to that, Guy, first things first, as always, what's on your radar right now?
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here with you for another week on the podcast. Top of mind for me this past week has been this big Golden Dome missile shield event that we at Threat Status hosted on May 13 in Pentagon City in Northern Virginia. The event featured all kinds of eye-opening discussions on President Trump's call for a next-generation missile shield to protect the U.S. homeland from fast-evolving Chinese and Russian hypersonic missile development, as well as Iranian and North Korean intercontinental ballistic missile threats. Senator Deb Fischer, the chair of the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, gave a keynote address on that, Ben. Senator Tim Sheehy, a former Navy SEAL, also gave an address at the event. Threat Status's own Bill Gertz spoke, as did our regular columnist, former CIA officer Dan Hoffman. There were panel discussions with Lockheed, L3 Harris, Booz Allen, United Launch Alliance. Tory Bruno from ULA was there speaking. Mark Montgomery was there. Tom Carrico from CSIS. Mark Montgomery, obviously, from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. I encourage our listeners to go check out the videos of the event on the special Threat Status Golden Dome page, easily findable on the Washington Times website. Ben, I know we're going to talk in a minute here a little bit more about the actual what got discussed at this Golden Dome event. But before we do, really quick, President Trump's visit in recent days to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates has been on our radar at Threat Status. The most eye-opening thing from this trip was the president's announcement while in Qatar on May 15 that he believes that Iran has mostly agreed at this point to his demands for a new nuclear deal to contain Tehran's nuclear enrichment activities and alleged atomic bomb-making program. It is too early to tell whether Trump is just totally out over his skis with this comment. A lot of critics, particularly hawks in Washington, are telling me, Ben, that they fear the president is getting played by the Iranians, who are blatantly employing a strategy of buying time and stringing Trump along with the promise of some kind of diplomatic solution here, when in reality they're scrambling behind the scenes to move toward nuclear breakout. So we are definitely tracking that. My own perspective, Ben, is that jaw or talk is better than war. So the very idea that Trump's team is holding talks with Iran is better than just having the two sides hurl escalatory threats at each other. Finally, Ben, one of the big things on this Trump Mideast trip has been the question of whether Trump could move the needle on getting Saudi Arabia to normalize relations diplomatically with Israel, to add Saudi Arabia to the Abraham Accords that saw others in the region recognize and normalize with Israel during Trump's first term, most notably the United Arab Emirates. So far, it's not clear that Trump was able to move the needle. It was very interesting, however, to see the president essentially call for an end of the Israel Hamas war in Gaza during his visit to Saudi Arabia. The Saudis and others continue to stand in support of a two-state solution to the Israeli Palestinian conflict and want Palestinians to have control of a future Gaza Strip. I don't want to pull the lid back on all of that right now, Ben, but the point is that it's not clear if Trump got what he wanted on this trip.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the sort of the big overarching plots that I'm watching here is the U.S. Israel relationship, specifically the Trump Israel relationship, because when you have talks with Iran and now Trump, as you said, calling for an end to the war in Gaza, I think the same day that Benjamin Netanyahu said there's, quote, no way, unquote, that Israel is going to stop its war in Gaza anytime soon. So we'll see where that tension goes. But while we're on the subject of negotiations, I want to talk briefly here about Russia-Ukraine peace talks in Istanbul. Now, it's interesting. A few days ago, it seemed like we were on the verge, at least, of a potential major breakthrough, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressing openness to meet face-to-face with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Putin himself was the one who even kind of got the ball rolling on the talks. And President Trump said he was willing to go to Turkey during his Mideast trip that Guy just talked about if it helped get Putin and Zelensky in a room together. Instead, none of them, Trump, Zelensky, or Putin, are going. Russia's sending a delegation led by Vladimir Medinsky, an aide to Putin, and some other officials. The Ukrainian side sending a delegation led by its defense minister and other officials. Make no mistake, this is still a big step that these two sides are having direct talks. It's the first time they've officially met since the early days of the war, now more than 3 years ago. So it's a very positive and constructive step. But what I'm hearing again, Guy, from sources is, once again, there's a sense of frustration inside the administration. And that's no surprise. We've seen that publicly. Trump has become increasingly frustrated with Putin. And it seems pretty obvious in this case, again, that Putin was the one who short-circuited or stood in the way of the idea of face-to-face talks with Zelensky. So we'll see what comes out of this. Maybe there is a major breakthrough after all, but if there's not, and it looks again like Russia is the roadblock to progress, maybe Trump decides to pull the trigger on secondary tariffs or sanctions on Russia's oil sector, which we've been talking about here on this show for weeks, if not months. So we'll see where that goes. One thing on the Golden Dome event, Guy, because I want to zero in on one specific issue that was of a special interest to me there. There was a bit of a heated discussion between two friends of the show. You mentioned Tory Bruno, the CEO of the United Launch Alliance, and retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery of FDD. They had a really good, passionate discussion about to what degree THAAD batteries, terminal high altitude area defense systems, should be part of the Golden Dome missile defense architecture. Tory Bruno helped design THAAD back in the mid-2000s for Lockheed Martin. Here's what he told me during the panel discussion, quote, "These are systems we already have in production. We already have them deployed. We already have NORTHCOM, being U.S. Northern Command. We simply need to bring them back to defend the homeland and then replace them in their expeditionary roles over time," end quote. What he means is bringing back THAADs deployed overseas. According to the Congressional Research Service, the Army operates 7 THAAD batteries. Each one of them consists of 95 soldiers, 6 truck-mounted launchers, 48 interceptors, radar surveillance equipment, other pieces of equipment. Some of them are based in Texas, one's in Guam, one's in South Korea. One was reportedly sent to the Middle East after the October 2023 Hamas attack on Israel. So what Tory Bruno is saying is you bring back some of those assets, those deployed THAAD assets, bring them back to the U.S. homeland and use that as an initial Golden Dome capability, and then you build more to replace the ones overseas. Does that put U.S. troops potentially at risk in the Middle East or in the Pacific if they were to come under an attack? Maybe, and that's probably a longer discussion for another day, but Mark Montgomery's point was that THAAD, a decades-old system, shouldn't really play a major role in the long-term plan for the Golden Dome, something designed to handle future threats like the most advanced maneuvering hypersonic weapons that China and Russia have. And he said we shouldn't pull back capabilities like THAAD from forward deployed forces right now. So, Guy, I hate to do the journalist thing here and say that I see both sides, but in this case, I actually do. President Trump wants to show progress, and I think THAAD could help the administration say, here's an initial kind of part one of the Golden Dome. But on the other hand, this is, by definition, a forward-looking, future-focused project. And there's a good argument to be made. We really need to focus on space-based capabilities and other technologies.
Well, Ben, again here, we are recapping from the May 13 Golden Dome for America event that Threat Status hosted at the Ritz-Carlton, Pentagon City in Arlington, Virginia. All of the videos of these conversations are on the threat status pages. That was definitely a very interesting debate that you moderated. Another highlight for me was really this discussion about the extent to which a futuristic network of missile tracking satellites fused together with artificial intelligence software will actually be the backbone of Golden Dome. We got into that in the panel that I moderated, where Booz Allen Vice President Chris Bogdan, a retired lieutenant general, basically outlined a vision of automated satellites operating together the way drivers of the ride-sharing app Uber operate on a shared platform in real time. This whole futuristic vision of thousands of autonomous satellites moving like self-driving cars was discussed. Ed Zoyce from L3 Harris Technologies, who's actually overseen the development and test launching of hypersonic ballistic tracking space sensor satellites. These are HBTSS satellites that are actually specifically called for in Trump's executive order on missile defense from late January. It was a pretty interesting event. There was a fireside chat with former Northern Command and NORAD Commander Glenn Van Herk, who dives into acquisition issues, how there should be a Golden Dome czar. All kinds of positions were taken on these issues during the discussions. Ben, again, it's all on the threat status pages under Golden Dome.
And we're joined now by Rob Ryan, Director of Business Development at Teledyne FLIR. Rob, you spent 20 years in the Army, most recently as the Director of the Robotics Requirements Division. So I'm excited to talk about robotics here in a few minutes. But thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Of course. So we're here at Soft Week 2025 in Tampa, Florida, gathering of special operations forces from around the world, private industry. Teledyne FLIR has a sizable presence, of course, here on the convention floor, and your company's well known to folks like myself who work in this space, but for listeners who might not be familiar, can you just kind of briefly walk us through what Teledyne FLIR does?
Teledyne FLIR is a multidiscipline company. So you have a defense sector that I work for. It does a lot of stuff with surveillance. They build a lot of things for our utilization of forces, from optics to gimbals. When I say gimbals, anything that can help something see something better.
Yeah.
That's a critical piece to that. All the way down to our new loitering munitions with our R1, or perhaps our key industry partner, that piece of equipment we've gotten out, has been our Black Hornet series, Black Hornet 3 and 4, really getting to tactical ISR, and that is reconnaissance at the tactical level to help soldiers and formations see deeper and better in the next fight.
We'll get into some of those specifics, but I want to ask you kind of a big picture question off the bat. Even just on the military side, when you kind of walk around this convention floor and see everything, and even some stuff that you guys make, from drones to counter UAS, sniper sights, imaging systems, all this stuff, how complex modern day battlefields are becoming. There's just so much, so many interconnected systems, so many moving parts, AI, autonomous systems. But from your vantage point, what's the role of the human being on 21st century battlefields?
The human role doesn't change. And the approach that the United States uses is the human's always going to be in a loop in decision making with lethality and tactical outcome. That doesn't change. The application of technical capability augments both the human and the formations that we use in war and defense, and honestly, in humanitarian relief and disaster relief, which are critical missions that DoD does, in support of FEMA, both here and abroad. So I think that layer of technical capabilities that you see here at Soft Week enhance that formational capability to go X beyond. Think about this. Go back to Hurricane Katrina, for instance. Imagine we had the ability to have robotic systems go out and find people or bring supplies out and not put humans at risk. So if you can minimize the risks to human, but maximize the outcome to positivity, that's the added tech capabilities that are out there right now.
Yeah. The human in the decision-making process, how, from your vantage point, how has that changed over the years? I remember when I even started writing about AI, 5-6 years ago, the human in the loop, don't worry, there'll be a human in the loop in this decision-making process. I mean, when you talk about drone swarms and where we are with technology, physically impossible to have humans making each one of these decisions.
But you're taking this from the lens, though, of someone that exists in an ecosystem that's been built over the last 40 years. So when you go in, you very rarely don't have reception, the ability to move data. When you go to a tactical area or you go into an area that's been affected by a natural disaster, that infrastructure doesn't exist. So it's not necessarily robust. So the human actually is controlling that augmentation of that capability. As you build that, you get deeper capability, right? And that's when you talk about the AI portion that you just mentioned. You go, hey, how do I want this to help me? The AI isn't taking over anything. It's still coming back and utilizing the human, and you can say the human in the loop, but it's providing the inputs for him to make decisions. And I look at it and go, for instance, when you say AI, what do you mean? So a lot of senior leaders in the Army and across Washington, I don't necessarily, if you asked 100 people in DC define AI, you would get 100 different answers. So I come back and go, is it a noun or a verb is my favorite thing to ask people. And then I go, what do you want it to do? Is it characterization of vehicles? Is it fly out and say, yes, that's a human with a weapon, that's not a human with a weapon? What are the characteristics within AI you think it needs to deliver for the human to increase their awareness and make decisions at a quicker speed?
Yeah.
AI is a decision enabler, not necessarily a tactical output.
So in other words, the human can actually have more control over situations with the technological tools at their disposal.
Yeah, and then for the audience, I'd kind of go back and go, how many of you have the auto assist in your car when you drift in a lane? Come back to that and kind of go, hey, do you turn that off when you get a rental? What do you do with that? And I go, well, sometimes you go, I just flew in, it's 11 o'clock, I'm driving to a hotel, I'm unfamiliar, I need this on. And it actually helps you. Think about kind of where that's at in modern day, and then apply that now to a formation that possibly has a drone out that sees something that is unexpected. And all of a sudden now you have complete awareness and you're being informed because others inside just the leader are going to inform that leader to help make better decisions.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an omnipresent capability, not just a singular capability to the end user or that person in the loop.
Well, let's drill down on drones for a second. I've gotten a sense talking to a lot of folks around the floor here at Soft Week that there's a lot of energy and momentum behind small, cheap, relatively really cheap, attritable drones. I had somebody describe it as almost looking at it as ammunition. You kind of just, it's sent out there and it's gone. You kind of just forget about it. But is that the direction that UAS is headed? What's the balance between that, larger drones, things that can be reused? Do we need all of those things? Where's this space headed?
Well, I think what you're seeing right now across the board, especially at Soft Week, is, coming out of the global war on terrorism, we really managed that at a operational level of war. And if you think about Predators and Hellfire missiles, and what you were seeing on TV is we allowed that to be tactical outcomes to be managed at the operational level. I think the realization was we had a capability 10 years ago to bring drones in at the lower level, the tactical level of defense. And we kind of were hesitant because we were controlling it because we weren't fighting a traditional war. We were really manhunting the last 20 years. Now all of a sudden you look at Ukraine, you look at Gaza, and you look at the ability to get precise at the lower level. And when you look at drones, you look at it and go, hey, what does this provide? So number one is risk the force. I said, now you have the ability to leverage. I tell everybody right now, as a person that served for 36 years, I go, one thing I never possessed in my formation, all the way up to brigade, was the ability to kill a tank beyond line of sight. Now we can have that in a squad. How does that change maneuver? How does it change the tactics? That application starts to change how we look at war and how we maneuver. I've said this a couple times before. I go, this may be a greater deterrent to war than we've ever seen, or it could be even worse because now you've got the democratization of technology for both actors, non-state actors, and actors of states that now can leverage this on fields to control human outcomes.
Well, look at the Houthis and what we've seen in the Red Sea recently.
Absolutely. So as you look at that, you go, hey, low deterrent. Now when you talk low cost, I go, you get what you pay for. So part of low cost comes back down to what do you mean? So if you look at the comparison with the Red Sea, which you just mentioned, the Houthis have shot how many hundreds of thousands of dollars of drones, and how many millions to billions have we done in counter? Right. So as you look at this place, there's going to be a sweet spot that we figure out across DOD, and across really from LE, to be honest with you, from law enforcement up. How do we protect our society? How do we do it so we manage privacy? But how do we do it in a sense that allows us to be active, not necessarily proactive to every situation that involves something that's different than generations before have seen. And I think that's the wrestling match that the Army and SOF are going through right now. Yeah. SOF's application of drones is a little bit different in the Army because of the maturity of the force and the experience they get, the latitude to leverage different systems on the battlefield.
How far are we away from the sweet spot? I mean, could a critic look at what's been going on with the Houthis and say, we have a long way to go? The amount of money that we're spending and the Predator drones we've lost, now we have FA-18s gliding off of ships, and they're, using drones that they can essentially build off of, parts that they get from Amazon or what have you. Are we a long ways away from finding that?
No, I don't think we're a long ways away. I think part of it goes back to how you protect yourself. One is, so we have standoff because we're in the ocean, so they're going to be inactive. A ship moves, right? It's never stationary. You kind of come back in and go, so how does it apply? I go, in ground war, and I'll walk that back to sea and protection. It goes in ground war, that standoff right now changes the tactical balance. So as I said, you can kill a tank from offset, right? A squad couldn't do that before. You're seeing that in Ukraine. You're seeing precision in Gaza, for instance. You look at that and go, how would you apply? How would you fight differently? So if I was going to put you in the ring against Mike Tyson, all right, how would you fight him? Now I told you, you got Mike Tyson, but now you have a 15-inch increase of reach. That's the change you've got to look at and go, how does that affect how I'm going to do that outcome? In the sea, as you look at it, you go, with a counter UAS and some of the systems you've seen here at Soft Week, you go, how do I get them to work in conjunction with one another? And then you look at the lethality for counter UAS, not just to detect and deter, but to defeat. Hey, shooting an object out of the sky, if you ever shot skeet for the first time, I guarantee you didn't hit 25 out of 25.
Yeah.
You had to learn. I think we're going through that learning process right now. Even with the radars, and we can't compare ourselves to a fibered society like Israel that has a Golden Dome. We have to look at the ability that tactical dome that we put over, especially like the fleet out there, is not necessarily always going to be precise. And we're seeing that imprecision across the battlefield. The other thing is we haven't launched on the ground to go after that. So there's a certain part of that as you look at American way of warfare is, hey, we're going to continue to attrit you, but we're not necessarily going to put boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part that you look at with standoff and goes, that's going to be the critical decision for senior leaders in DC to make as we look at our application of force in the future, now into the future.
Rob, you are the director of business development, so I want to ask you kind of a business-related question here. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody at Soft Week who doesn't want to see some changes to the acquisition process. You've heard that, from the stage, including from General Fenton this week. But, we talk about this sometimes in big, broad, amorphous terms. So rather than just ask you kind of what changes you want to see, let me come at the question sort of the opposite way. What should the end result look like in a 21st century acquisition system where the U.S. is trying to outcompete China, in the race for political, military, economic dominance? What would sort of a peak functioning acquisition process, if you will, what would that look like? How fast would it move? How quickly would a product go from a prototype to being fielded in your ideal world?
I think there's two sides of acquisition. You can do things semi-fast. I would argue with General Fenton, who I know fairly well, it is sped up with MTAs and other things, and they're transactional agreements that speed up the traditional process. One is, where does it fit in your formation? So there's a lot of tech that can do a lot of things, but I think there's some misguided, how do you need to change your formational design? Does the formation design fit it right now? Because you can apply all this tech right away and go use it, and it gives you a capability, but is it a standing capability, or is it something that's just going to fade away over time? So one of the things I look at, you mentioned drones earlier, and I go, what does a war stock of drones look like? Can we do a war stock? Does that mean that I need environmentally controlled storage? Does that mean I need servers in every storage facility to update firmware? What does this look like across both, for the Army Material Command all the way up to General Fenton and Soft? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And then if I'm doing it faster, and I can perhaps with other authorities, I can do it faster and get away from the McNamara era, if you will, of acquisition, is as it lands in, is it adjusting your tactics, techniques, and procedures? Because part of this is it's enhancing those, I said before, robotics and or drones and use of ground and air things enhance human performance and formational performance. Okay, as you do that, there's a thing called trust with that AI you mentioned earlier too. How are we building that with our formation? And I will tell you that a lot of the services have culture frictions. There's a lot of, I heard it from a senior officer, I don't want to take the finger off of triggers. And I go, no, the controller is the new trigger. And we've got to think differently in our approach. The acquisition piece, I kind of come in and go, Maybe we speed it up a little bit, but I don't want it at a sprint. I want it at a jog. Right now it's at a walk. So I think we have to be careful as we manipulate that. I think a lot of that may have to do with the processes of checks and balances being somewhat old school, and how we get something from A all the way to milestone C. And that may be problematic. Where are the two areas you could jog in there to get it faster, if you will, in the sense of that process? But where's the part you really need to take care of? I use this quote a lot. I go, back when Chuck Yeager hit Mach 1 and Mach 2, I go, there are probably other folks that tried it. We don't know who they are. There's a risk associated with that. And I think we have to go back into taking that intellectual risk. And even if we get it wrong a little bit in DC, adjust that dial to figure out the right process for new application in the art and science, if you will, of acquisition.
Rob, last thing, and I want to ask about robotics. I was at the AUSA conference in Huntsville a couple of months ago, and I saw a great presentation from Army officials about human-machine integrated formations, using robots, not humans, to make first contact with the enemy. And I talk a lot about this on the podcast because I find it fascinating, and maybe this sounds a little bit naive, but I always wonder when I'm talking to someone like yourself, do soldiers trust a robot as much as they trust a human being? I mean, if you're talking about it, sending a robot to do a job, where if they do it incorrectly, your life and the lives of those around you are going to be at risk. I mean, so what's your sort of the trust of these things that are now becoming ubiquitous in everything soft, the Army, the military writ large does?
That's a great question. So does Ford trust their robots to build cars? So you have a closed ecosystem that allows you, and a closed architecture that allows you and those robots to perform and augment human activity, right? The problem when you get to robotization of an armored force is you become network dependent. You're not network enabled. Ford's plants are network enabled because there's an ecosystem that exists for those to do everything they need to do. We are still trying to figure out how to get network enabled. We're network dependent right now. The other part is we can't hastily jump in. And one of the things that we did when I was in robotics is we labeled this term robotic enabled maneuver. And someone asked me, well, it's not going to take over for the soldier. I go, no, but there's 4 tasks that it can do. You mentioned aerial drones. Can they do security? Can I put AI in them that says something's moving in sector 4, that it puts a buzz in my ear that tells me something's in sector 4? Does that create awareness? Can I take a soldier off and put him on a different task? So I think we have to look at the simplicity of how we apply it. We have to take a task like squad maneuver or squad battle drill X, and we got to look at what are the 3 things we can build trust in with that formation. What's the maturity timeline to get there? And then how do we see that in application? Then what's the next step? It's like here at Teledyne FLIR, I always ask us, hey, we're building Black Hornet 4s. What's Black Hornet 5 look like? What's the feedback from our user? And then what's our tech maturity? And do they match? And where don't they overlap? So I think we have to look at it and go, hey, in a squad attack, there are X amount of critical collective tasks that formation has to do. Inside of that, there's individual tasks the soldier does. What can robotics do? And there's a few that they can do. Hey, it can move stuff. We have a mule that can carry stuff.
Right.
Okay, pretty simple to do. Does it fire? Can it protect itself? Can it electroshock somebody that tries to take something off it who doesn't know how to turn it off? What are things that we can do to augment that formation to enhance their warfighting capability? And I think that's the number one thing we've got to lay out in both a science and art kind of way, because no fight's ever the same.
Rob Ryan, Teledyne FLIR, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for your time, sir.
And it's time now for Threat of the Week, our weekly segment here in the show where Guy and I each identify a threat, whether it's here at home domestically or in some corner of the world that we think is impacting U.S. national security right now. This week, as you're listening to the show, Guy, what do you have as your threat of the week?
My threat of the week, Ben, is simply that the U.S. government won't move fast enough to actually deliver on Trump's call for a Golden Dome, or that the administration itself could somehow get in the way of its own initiative here, whether it's because of disorganization or miscalculated decisions on the part of administration officials trying to pick who in the private sector gets to work on this, or is it acquisition, malfeasance, abuse, and waste at the Pentagon or among private defense contractors? Whatever the reason, my point is that the Defense Intelligence Agency circulated an unclassified assessment this week predicting that China will have 4,000 hypersonic missiles by 2035. That's enough to fire several hundred at once, multiple times over. Will the U.S. move quickly enough?
Yeah. My thread of the week follows up on that, guy, and it's that we end up with kind of too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, with Golden Dome. Now, there does seem to be a consensus that Space Force Vice Chief of Space Operations, General Michael Gutlein, will be President Trump's Golden Dome czar. But here's an alternative scenario where we end up with something different. The Space Force and the Missile Defense Agency or other agencies are in a turf war about who controls some Golden Dome assets. The movement of assets across the U.S., maybe including THAADs, is slowed because U.S. Transportation Command's involved. Maybe Army Materiel Command is involved. Does NORTHCOM have control over assets protecting the northern U.S. and Alaska? Can they order the movement of assets? If we're intercepting something over the Mideast, is CENTCOM involved? In the Pacific, is INDOPACOM involved? Does Cyber Command have a role? If AI and autonomous systems are on board, who writes the rules for those? Does the Navy sign off on the interception of missiles from capabilities off the coast or in the Gulf of America? I could go on. And that's just the operational side. I didn't even get into, as Guy mentioned, the acquisition side. Who decides what the U.S. buys, how much, who oversees maintenance and upkeep, upgrades, new software, which personnel get pulled from which projects and assigned to Golden Dome, et cetera, et cetera. We can go on. So, Guy, my thread of the week is that, if for some reason we don't get an empowered Golden Dome czar or a new agency or something specific tailored to this project, we end up in this dark, nightmarish, bureaucratic morass that I just depicted.
That sounds pretty horrible, Ben.
I think it would slow the Golden Dome considerably. That's for sure. So we'll see what happens. Of course, we'll be tracking it closely here at Threat Status. And with that, thank you so much, Guy. Thanks for another great week on the podcast. A huge thanks to everybody involved with the Threat Status Golden Dome for America event. A huge thanks to Rob Ryan from Teledyne FLIR for joining me from Soft Week last week in Tampa, Florida. And a big thanks to all of you, our listeners. Please go ahead, hit the subscribe button. Guy and I will be back next week on the Threat Status Podcast.